Good morning, everyone. You'll be pleased to know that I think I'm the last speaker before you get to have a toilet break and coffee break. I'm not quite sure which in order you'd like to do that. But first and foremost, I'd just really like to thank the Cold Chain Federation for asking me to speak today. It's the first time I've been at one of these events. So certainly some of the conversations before the conference got going and indeed some of the content I'm finding fascinating. Plenty of notes. I'd equally like to say that although I'm going to talk about sustainability, I don't profess to be a subject matter expert in sustainability. So what you won't find me doing today is preaching about the theory. But what I will try and do is give you some practical examples and experiences that we've gone through as we've tried to face into that. So I'm going to try and rattle through a handful of slides relatively quickly, and hopefully at the end of this 25-minute session that there'll be some time for some questions. So before we begin, I thought we'd give you a little bit of an overview of ASDA Logistics Services. I'm sure you'll know about the ASDA brand. You've probably passed an ASDA store as you've come through here today. But we're quite sizable as regards the logistics function. Other than about 15% of our activity that we contract out in the distribution centres, we serve 630 shops. We send out about 1.4 billion cases of food and non-food across the course of a year. And we travel about 80 million miles from depots to shops. All of that with a colleague base of 11,500 people. So quite a sizable opportunity. What I took the opportunity to do at the start of this year was refresh our strategic framework, and there you can see it. So a little bit to the point at the introduction, we're going through quite a lot of change as a business. So it was right for me to respond to having a strategy led by transforming logistics services. And you can see there that we've got three key pillars, all about providing best-in-class logistics. And that's important to us because not so long ago, we were a relatively one-dimensional distribution facility. So we were picking lots of volume for shops and delivering to shops. We now control pretty much all of our import activity, a growing proportion of our inbound volume from domestic, and we've got a growing pick-up and drop-off parcel business. So how do we react to the challenges around that? We are supporting growth for the business, so that fundamentally is important. So I talked about 630 shops. What we're not particularly great at as a business, and we've never really had a participation in the convenience part of the business. So certainly the acquisition from TDR and the Issa brothers will fast-track that pretty significantly. You'll have seen in the press, probably quite recently, our acquisition of EG UK, and about 120 petrol filling stations that have been owned by the co-op. So very, very quickly, 630 will double in size, but that's going to be quite challenging for us as a function, because we're typically big depots delivering to big shops on big vehicles, and that will clearly change. And then the third pillar that I would call out, and it's come through as a really common trend so far today, and indeed in the questioning, all about people. Now, in fairness, probably 2 years ago, that wouldn't have been in the top three. I wanted to promote that this year because of all of the challenges that were found in the last 12 to 18 months. We all remember the driver shortage. I think that was 2 summers ago. My warning to everyone, it's certainly a warning to my team, is that we are in danger of being lulled into a false sense of security because of the lack of volume that's about at the moment. So think about what was said this morning. You know, consumer habits mean that people are buying less. Clearly that drives the retail agenda. So other than a couple of notable exceptions, pretty much all of the retail business is in negative volume growth. That's the same for us, it's the same for most of the retailers. So actually this year we don't have a driver shortage. I am concerned that once the volumes start ramping up again in the next 12 months, that may change. So building an engaging colleague experience and finding ways to keep people when you get them is crucially important. What snuck up on us last year, if I'm being really candid, we started last year not thinking that warehouse resource would be a challenge. So of our 11,500 colleagues, about 8,500 work in our warehouses. Last March, April, that changed significantly. All of the stuff that you will know around post-Brexit, post-pandemic, there just aren't the amount of quality people coming into the industry, and there's not really the quality amount of people starting out. Now, I think we we provide pretty good conditions for our colleagues. It's been tough in every region, and we've actually got 2 or 3 geographical regions at the moment where not only can you find it difficult to get quality people, it's difficult to get older people, and I'm sure you'll find some of those same challenges. Now, what we've then got underneath that is 4 building blocks, 4 steps, all about the operating model, some of the stuff that you'll have heard this morning, driving simple, efficient, effective operations. You've also some questions there about technology. We are trying our very best to use technology right across our logistics network. What we're finding, and it's a bit to what Paul said in the Q&A, actually doing more proof of concepts. You know, we've had some pretty challenging experience where you try and do a big bang approach to something and generally it doesn't work. So proof of concepts, doing stuff more often, trying to fail fast and move on to the next thing is what we're trying to encourage. Collaboration is key. You'll hear this a lot throughout my presentation this morning through lots of different guises, and I think the word collaboration will probably change as we move through and talk about sustainability in different guises. And then finally, you could argue that ESG actually runs right through all of that, and we did debate that when we were pulling this strategy together, but I wanted it to be a separate step so that we could cascade that right through the colleague base to show that ESG is very important to us. There we go. So brief headline on our corporate ESG priorities. I'm not going to dwell on this too much, to be fair, but four key things for the corporation. It's all about healthy and sustainable choices. It's about net zero carbon. It's about nature positive, and it's about zero waste. And wrapped around all of that, which is the bottom statement, just making sure that we've got good hygiene factors across all of those business fundamentals. I'm not going to dwell on that. If you want to see our ESG report, it was published actually only about 6 weeks ago. On to ASDA.com, you'll be able to see the full report there. Might be running out of batteries here. Oh, it's gone too far. There we go. So how are we responding to that within supply chain? 4% of ASDA's total carbon footprint is all associated with logistics and supply chain. So it does represent a huge opportunity for me and my function to respond to that. Most of our activity focuses, no great surprise, on net zero carbon and zero waste. And I'm going to give you some practical examples as we go through. And I've tried to just categorise this across on the left-hand side to the legal requirements, the stuff that, quite frankly, we're going to have to do. Some of that is commercially going to be quite challenging. We've got to get on and do it. The stuff in the middle, where it makes sense, we just need to crack on and do some stuff. And then the third bucket on the bottom, third there, all about looking forward with some bigger change pieces of activity. So I'm going to start with looking at our fleet, and might be a disappointment to some of you in the room. We've not got all of the answers. In fact, I'm not sure I've got any answers, to be quite honest. I was down in London yesterday with the Logistics UK team, meeting with the rest of my peer group. Fascinating, because we all find the same challenges and frustration. But what is really important is that we can't wait for all of the stars to align. Because I think if we do that, quite frankly, we'll do nothing and we'll achieve nothing. So I think it's important that we start with what we think is the right answer for now. So this isn't necessarily the right answer. I think it's the right answer for now. I'm not convinced it's the right answer going forward. So that's quite an interesting dichotomy when you're trying to really get some pretty significant capital investment from the business. We started fairly small. So we had a couple of trucks that were running on LNG back in 2017. We scaled that up very, very significantly in 2020. Just at the time, and I think it was Claire's first slide that she shared, the gas prices went up 3 times. So that was an absolute delight. But a bit like Mastermind, we've started, so we'll finish. And we've now got 2/3 of our fleet that run on biogas. And that's, I think, DHL might be chasing us down, but I think the biggest gas fleet in the UK. So we've got 620 trucks that run on biogas. That'll be just short of 1,000 in the complete fleet within the next 18 months. But it's been tough. It would be wrong of me to say anything else. The one thing that I can safely say is that when you transition from diesel to anything else, it will be hard work. But I'm glad that we've done what we've done. It's still quite painful, but we're feeling that pain now. People that haven't started to do this, I'm sure will start to feel that pain going forward. A few examples of that, and some of the things that we didn't necessarily recognise when we kicked this off in the outset. This is a really big deal for drivers. So if you've been a driver of a truck for 30 years, 20 years, 15 years, and all you've done at the end of your shift is go to a diesel pump and fill up, all of a sudden you're changing their world overnight. So I would say, whatever you choose to do, don't take any shortcuts with training. Make sure that that's absolutely top quality, and give the drivers the ability to understand that over a period of time. The infrastructure, this is probably not a great surprise. The infrastructure is not readily available, and again, if I'm being candid, isn't particularly reliable. And that's pretty important when you're running, as I said at the start of the presentation, 80 million miles a year with stores and customers that are pretty demanding. And what you can say over the course of the last many, many decades is that diesel infrastructure is pretty bulletproof. You have a problem with a pump, it might be down for half an hour. I've had a gas station this week that's been down for 3 days. That's pretty painful. And we have to find different ways of doing that. So that clearly is not good enough. Now, the reality is it's still relatively new technology. It will get better, but we're feeling the pain of some of that. And I think that comes on to my first point around collaboration. The importance to collaborate with other people that will be taking on the same technology for filling stations in this example is going to be crucially important. I don't think we will have all of the operators that move on to new low carbon fuels all with their own infrastructure. It's too pricey and you just simply won't get the amount of it in time. As I said before, I'm really proud about what we've achieved actually. So that said, really proud about what we've achieved in this space. But there is no certainty that this is the right thing going forward. It is quite possible that in 8, 9, 10 years' time, that some of this may have to change. And we have to stay open-minded about that. The other point I've put on there, so I was also conscious that I'm talking to cold chain. We've also put some electric hookups in our yards. Incredibly, when we looked at the data on this a couple of years ago, 40% of the diesel that we use in our refrigerated trailers is used on the yards and not on the roads. So we have invested significantly to do that, and that's been achieved in the last 6 months. Third time lucky, there we go. And then if we go back to what I will class as a bit of good old-fashioned logistics optimisation, and going back to the future actually with some terminology that I used in ASDA a number of years ago, all about how do we drive fewer, cheaper and friendlier miles. It was originally fewer, cheaper miles, and then we thought we better bring the sustainability agenda into it. So all about how do we get after fewer, cheaper and friendlier miles. So the 17,000 deliveries a week that we make to shops is clearly the foundation of our network. We are continuing to invest in higher cube trailers. It's a bit of a no-brainer. It's a win-win. It definitely saves money if you can get them reasonably well utilised, and it takes miles and carbon off the road. We're utilising the existing network to drive some of the growth that I talked about. So all of the convenience stores that we'll take on in the next 3 years, we will use in our existing chilled distribution centres, and we've got a really good final mile associated with that. Many other people would do that across more national solutions. So we've had to come up with some different operating models to make sure that we can fit that activity. I didn't do that. So all of that's in play. And we're just in the process of implementing a new route planning and route optimisation software solution. We already plan all of our activity for all of our shops through one national planning hub, and we did that a couple of years ago. But the exciting developments come around our primary or inbound network. We provide logistics for about 800 million cases of volume that comes into us. So I talked about the 1.4 billion, pretty much all of the volume that goes into our shops comes through our network. about 800 million cases we currently control on inbound, and that's through collaboration with a number of transport and consolidator partners, but we have started to get our own arms around that more recently. So we are going to bring those two networks together with, with the investment that we've got in route planning, the investment that we've got in a national planning hub. It makes sense that at some point in the next 18 months, that will all be planned through one platform for all of the activity that we do across logistics. So that's all about driving fewer, cheaper and friendlier miles. Third time lucky, there we go. So on to vans. So we also run a pretty sizable fleet of home delivery vans. I was around the business when we first started doing this out of a dark store in Watford, crikey, 24 years ago, and we had 6 vans. So we've got nearly 3,300 vehicles today. And this is going to be a big deal. So at the moment, for now, we think battery electric vehicle is the right answer for now. But we are starting slowly. So last year, we had 2. This year, we'll have 78, and that's in 10 shops. But we're going to have to get to 320 shops and best part of 3,200 vehicles in 7 years' time. And that's a bit of a sobering thought, and I was thinking about this last night. If you think back 7 years ago, that's when we voted to leave the EU. In many ways, that seems like yesterday. Fast forward 7 years from now, you won't be able to buy a new petrol or diesel car or van. So this is here now, this is around the corner, so it's a big deal. So we are early days, we're focused on learning fast, we're testing the range through different seasons, we're checking out driver acceptance, we're checking the driving performance, and ultimately it's about the 3 R's when it comes to these things. It's about range, recharge, and it's about reliability. Similar to heavy fleet, definitely collaboration solutions on charging infrastructure will be crucial. That's regardless of whether we think we've got the grid capacity. That's a completely different argument, I'm sure. But from our perspective, again, similar to the low carbon fuels piece on big fleet, I suspect that we'll have to share each other's facilities as we move forward. There we go. And then into the warehouse. So I think sometimes when everything comes at us in supply and logistics, there's a pretty significant temptation to take the thought process that if something's not broken, don't try and fix it. And I think warehouse MHE would be a good example of that. Good old lead acid batteries have been bulletproof for many, many decades. But we've sort of tried to lean into that to see if there was a better solution. And we are cracking on with that. I know it's not going to make a huge amount of difference in the grand scheme of things, but we just think it's the right thing to do. When you look at what we're doing with lithium ion, with what we're doing with hydrogen, the reality is that within the next 6 years, lead acid will reduce by about 40%, and we'll see that as a pretty significant electricity saving. That's probably the only thing I want to talk about in the warehouse. Genuinely fascinated by the discussion with Clive and Stein, and we've got some work to do to understand what does refrigeration look like in our depots, because I think to your point, the reality is we don't know about it, so we're not really doing anything about it. And then touching on zero waste briefly and into our recycling centres, very much at the gritty end of logistics, if there is such a thing, but increasingly important as we drive our zero waste and recycling agenda. All of the recyclables and all of the waste from our stores comes through our network, so we'll leverage our network well to get that stuff back in, and we've got strong quality control across 9 ASCs, as we call them, ASDA service centres that are pretty much linked to our chilled distribution centres. And again, collaboration's another good theme here. We already wash trays for some of our competitors. So for me, driving sustainability is not about competitiveness with our traditional competitors. So it's a little bit of a sales pitch. If anyone needs a waste recycling solution, we are trying to look at the operating model of these things and make them probably a little bit more shared user as we go forward. So as I say, Not the most sexiest things, but very, very important. All of our waste, as I say, we're at zero waste to landfill, all comes through our network and into our ASCs. And then just a little bit of a look into the future. So some of the things that we're starting to look at. We're very excited about trials that we've got with hydrogen-powered heavy trucks. You might have seen some of that on the news. And then, quite a scary prospect that a self-driving hydrogen truck will probably get on the road next year, clearly with a driver in it, but it's got the capability to be self-driving. And then, as I'm sure there'll be some people in the audience here, we've looked at some alternatives to diesel-powered fridge units before. Never quite managed to get anything meaningful off the ground, but we continue to remain open-minded. The other thing as well I'll just talk about is consumer behaviour. Talks there about re-commerce as a growth. We do have our own pick-up and drop-off parcel solution that is growing at a rate of knots called TU. Again, that goes through our distribution network, so it's as green as it can be. But the reality is re-commerce will be a big thing. And anyone heard of Vinted? That's going to be absolutely massive, and it's going to drive further activity through the various parcel carriers. So, we will get impacted with that. And how do we continue to make sure that we leverage our existing infrastructure to come up with the right solutions? So rather than me waffling on, I think we have got a video that shows some of the stuff that we're trying to do on van design. So look, just some key learnings for me. Very important that we balance all of the new technologies that we're looking at, not only with what we're looking at the future, but it's got to work for now. So it's important that everyone recognises that. We have got to make sure that we avoid the temptation of becoming too short-term in those decision-making. So having a longer-term and more holistic view of where this is going to take is going to be important. But please, my advice to you would be, don't wait for all of the stars to align before you do something. And then something I mentioned before, trial, learn and fail fast. I think it's in all of us, sometimes when you get something wrong and it doesn't work, we feel bad about it. I'm trying to encourage a culture in our function where actually that's all right. If we're doing it for the right reasons, we're not going to get everything right, and we'll have to go through a few failures to uncover the odd unpolished diamond. And then finally, as you'd expect me to say, we need to make sure that we keep sustainability at the heart of everything. That's it from me. I don't know whether I've got any time for any questions. Yes. Okie dokie. I've not got any panel members to help me out, so I'm on this on my own, I think.
How will ASDA remain competitive on store price while investing a sustainable supply chain? Crikey.
Any easier questions than that? Look, the reality is we've got a pretty good record in driving efficiency. And again, I'm going to talk about what I do within our logistics function. The challenge we've got, someone else mentioned it earlier, the reality is over 10 or 15 years of that focus, all of the easy stuff's gone. So the only way that we can do this now is by investing. And if you think about some of the things that we're trying to do to bring networks together, to absolutely make sure that we're taking out more empty miles. We're already quite efficient from an outbound perspective, but what I'm trying to do is make sure that we can look at all of it end to end. Imports, inbound, outbound, and by doing that and by optimising, it'll make a big difference, because clearly every pound that we save, or indeed every pound that we overspend, does affect ultimately the economics of the business. So that's the difference, I think, when you're a logistics function for a retailer. It's got very much a direct approach to it. So, we've got another significant optimisation challenge. It's always a delight this time of year working through our next year's business plan. So we have lots of challenges to overcome to do that.
Just related to that, what are customers saying about the sustainability credentials of ASDA? What do they actually say to you?
I think it's a tricky one at the moment because at the moment, and Claire and Alex may have a view on this, I think consumers still want everything whenever they want it.
Yeah.
So if consumers still want strawberries on Christmas Day, it's quite difficult to really change that. I'm not sure that it's the retailers' accountability to change the consumers' habits. What we have to do a better job of is that based on what's coming at us from a consumer's perspective is respond to it in a better way. But yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, clearly since the pandemic, the growth of online has increased significantly, and our ability to make that as more efficient is a priority.
Yeah, definitely. I've used your parcel service as well, which is very good.
Good.
Okay, Chris, do you see rail as a solution to solve some of your haulage emission reductions?
we were the first retailer to use rail. We started that nearly 25 years ago. It's only about 5% of our total miles. And I've always been really clear that as long as it's cost neutral at worst, we should convert to rail. The problem is, quite frankly, it's just too difficult to get on the basis that we need to take time out the supply chain. And if you think about our fresh foods, you guys will know all about this. You know, we order from our suppliers on day one. We receive the deliveries on the morning of day two, and they've got to be into all of our shops by 3 o'clock in the morning of day three. So whether we like it or not, at the moment, pretty much all of our train opportunities are ambient because we can't get to that level of agility in fresh foods. But yeah, we've got a number of trunking locations, but nothing really that talks about store delivery on rail at this point.
Okay, so that's very much long term then, isn't it? It's not going to happen.
Yeah, look, the industry is trying its best, but it's hard in a short lead time environment that we've got.
Okay. Given the issues you're having with LNGs, would you say ASDA went in too quickly and too heavily with investing in that technology?
Who asked that? It's not you, is it?
Anonymous.
Look, with the benefits of hindsight, we might have slowed down. When the difference between signing the business case off, we went big on this, to that fleet then joining the fleet, the price of gas went up 250%. And what was a slight commercial advantage when we started the project became a huge on cost, and we felt that through last year. But everyone's going to have to go through this. So in the balance of probability, you know, we could have gone a little bit slower, but we'd have still been into it significantly. And I don't believe that was the wrong thing. I've got no regrets about that particularly.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Chris. We're going to leave it there.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you.
Chris Hall. Thank you.